Okay.
Please.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you that on Zoom, thank you for attending. I think I have some friends from England. It's very early in their morning, so I appreciate their support. The talk today, I'm going to keep it to about an hour, I hope, and it's on the concept of qi and its expression in the Western context. Now, as I speak to a largely Chinese audience, I ask for your forgiveness if I get things wrong in terms of pronunciation and other things. Many of you will know more about qi than I do, but my point in this lecture is to talk about how I perceive qi as a reality and how it affects art making, mine in particular. And I hope to share with you some art from the Western world that I think has tried to explore the notion of qi in its own way. So I'd like to start, if I may. I have one image here. If you can just take a little time to read that, I think that will set the mood for me in terms of how I believe art functions in the world. I think this statement by a wonderful French cultural critic, René Houet, sums up very well my own feelings toward the process of making art and its significance in the world, whatever part of the world you come from. So if you just wait a minute and read that, and I shall continue then with the talk. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is a very large issue, that is our place as human beings in the universe and how art came into the world through our activities. And I often think about the ancient art of the world. Most cultures with habitation have some form of art going back tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And I often like to think about this idea, which is relevant to us now. Who is the audience? Who are those to whom we wish to speak or with whom we wish to communicate? What stories or experiences do we want to tell? The ancient art of the world, I think in most cases, would probably be considered as not art or aesthetics, but as a sacred act. That act was the humans trying to connect to the energies of the universe, such as they perceived them, that gave them light, temperature, water, food, animals to eat, fruits to eat, etc. The world around them, they were close to in a way that we've kind of lost the sense of in many ways in our modern world. But the impetus behind the art of the ancient world, I think, was to communicate with the energies of the universe. And I'm not sure, in many senses, that's changed a lot. We, of course, live in more political and social times, but nature is a constant in our life and dominates us completely, and we are beholden to it. So with that in mind, as I began my own journey as an artist, I looked at art of parts of the world I came from. This is a piece by Arnold Böcklin. It is a painting of the Isle of the Dead. It's a piece which was commissioned by a widow of a very rich man who was mourning the loss of her husband, and she wanted to paint a memorial to her husband's life. And so we have here this very profoundly beautiful and rather eerie, mysterious image of a boat being taken to an island, the center of which is dark, secluded, and unknowable to us, but evokes all sorts of senses of possibilities of what might be there. For me, it was the idea of the human being coming back to the natural world. In the Western tradition, architectural features and ruins are a reminder of the fragility, fragility of humanity in face of the magnitude of nature. And this is a feature in landscape touch on as we progress. Anyway, this is amongst the first images I saw when I was conscious of looking at images of art, and that was when I was about 9 or 10. This was the artist Turner, most of you will know, and has been a huge influence in my life, and an artist who I'm going to mention several times today in relationship to the underlying concept. Turner was a painter of the natural world like very few before him and very few after him. He was a remarkably experimental painter. His work, to me, along with one other, Claude Monet, who we will discuss briefly later, is an example for me of how people who are not of an Asian or Chinese sensibility or awareness have something which I think is akin to aspects of what I understand as a Chinese or as Asian aesthetic. And I'm using these terms loosely because I don't want to put make too light of it, but I will be talking in terms of the East and West in the generalized sense. I hope you all appreciate that, with all due respect, all the different cultures within that. But in Turner's case, the classical era, which he painted through, was also the beginning of a great change in the English landscape when industrialization was happening. We're now living in the post-technological age and all that that brings about with AI and other aspects. This was the era of the mechanical industrialization, and the very notion of nature and the realm of God in the West was being, in a sense, challenged. It had been challenged in many senses since the beginning of humanism and the Renaissance enterprise in the Mediterranean basin. But in 18th century England, the beginning of the 19th century saw industrialization of the landscape, and Turner often cited that in his paintings. This is a painting called Rain, Steam and Speed. And in this painting, you can see down here is a boat full of fishermen, and over there, there's three figures. This is a very poor slide, I apologize, are a choir of angels. So Turner is painting the supernatural and the very natural in concert. Set against that is the structure of the painting, which is split in half, the upper sky, the lower vaporous areas with the train coming towards us. The train coming towards us is the modern world coming into the ancient. He's beginning to acknowledge the fact that the world of nature and the dominance of nature has been challenged by the creations of humanity. Fellow painter at that time, Constable, and the British were the artists I saw first and readily began to feel an affinity with. This is John Constable, Storm at Sea. And often the Romantics were interested in the idea of the forces of nature as a reminder of the magnitude and power of that. And with Constable, he was a painter basically of the English landscape, but he also painted the skies, which he called the realm of his imagination. And the organs of his sentiment were clouds. The nature of clouds and their movement were symbols of freedom. So though Constable painted one part of England very particularly, at a time of industrialization when farms were being destroyed by workers who were losing their jobs, it was a time of great upheaval, he painted the landscape of his youth. He didn't deal with the political realities, but he dealt with the energies of the universe. This is a classic picture by the Haywain by Constable, which shows a landscape which is fecund, producing food under a canopy of a beautiful sky. The dark clouds here are symbols of potential difficulties or hardships ahead. But otherwise, you see a kind of bucolic vision of a perfect landscape, but a landscape as domesticated, utilized by humans to produce food, and nature in that Western sense is to some degree being controlled. And so this is an image of a domesticated landscape. The wildness resides in the sky above. The contrast between the domestic, immeasurable, and the immeasurable is very important here. Altdorfer, the landscape traditions of China precede those in Europe by approximately 1500 years. But this is, Altdorfer was one of the first, the German landscape artists to paint a landscape, this is in the 15th century, to paint a landscape which had little or no reference to humanity, with the exception of the castle you see there in the distance, or the township. But the thrust of this was that many times, the paintings of the landscape were done with the idea of biblical or mythical tales being told. This time, nature dominates. Nature's forms dominated its majesty. And this is one of the first paintings that makes the topic of landscape the natural world itself. The human beings take backstage. Shifting forward now to another part of the world, to China, and here the immortal, or the poet dreaming he's an immortal. And I like to contrast this painting with one by Friedrich. By contrast, they share a lot in common. In Chinese painting, for me, when I first saw it, I was confused by the lack of color, which I then realized was relative. There's a lot of color in this painting in terms of temperatures. And I realized through further reading that in the Song Dynasty, and other times, there was the 5 colors of black, which would distinguish temperatures of black, so that the monochrome painting was also a very subtle tonal scale of painting. But for me, when I first saw this painting, I was absolutely stunned by the kind of audacity, this fantastic image, which to me was not like a Hollywood stunt. This was profoundly beautiful moment where an artist had depicted himself, in this case, floating in a world free of the gravitational forces of the world, viewing the world in which he was part. Now, when I started looking at these paintings and comparing them to the Western, here we have a triangular structure. The figure forms the apex of a triangle, which is, in Renaissance terms, very much to do with stability and ascent. in a spiritual sense. In the Western tradition, angles and geometry are significantly important structures for identifying symbolic function and meaning. So the apex of the figure, the apex of the triangle, is the head of the man who breaks the boundary of the landscape. Metaphorically, his mind is contacting heaven. He is having perhaps a moment of deep reverie and connection to the natural world and to the spiritual. Notice here, this is one of the few paintings in the Western world where the landscape is painted down below the viewing point. And what we have here is the idea of a back of the person, which is supposed to invite you, the viewer, to become that person. It's an invitation into the painting. So male or female, you can stand there too and imagine that space. By taking, even though it's a male, that's the only identifying aspect, and the fact that he's probably, a city gentleman, not a country gentleman, because of the way he's dressed, but civilization in the natural world. And the breaking of the horizon point is critical. In Friedrich's paintings, one more I think is coming up, yes, the Monk at Sea, we see here a great bank of fog over the ocean. And in Chinese, or I beg your pardon, in Friedrich's cosmology, the idea of fog was the distance from God. And as you came clearer to understanding spiritual truth, the fogs would disappear, the clouds would disappear, and you would be in clear light. The head of the monk is below the horizon of the sea. He is yet to reach any kind of attainment, satori, nirvana. None of that is yet available to him. So the painting is imminent with the idea of what will become a realized condition, which is very, very powerful. My own relationship to the landscape in England, which is by contrast with America or China, as you know, a very small island, is remarkably beautiful and diverse for all of that. And part of my cultural ancestry is both primarily English, Welsh, and other UK elements and Northwestern European. But the landscape I got to know because my parents rented a place in the Welsh mountains. This tiny cottage here is where I spent many of my summers in this landscape. In a small house in the hills with no electricity. It was like living in another century. Wood fires, candles, lanterns. It was beautiful, and it still is to this day. It still has no power, but it's been a place where I got to understand the landscape in many, many ways. My father, who was a political geographer, was a China specialist. His interest was in land use and population movements in China through history to the present day. And at that point, he was getting regularly magazines like China Reconstructs from China, which were propagandist magazines, but talking about the advantages and the implications of industrialization. But in those magazines were pictures of Chinese landscapes, both Sung Dynasty and folk art. My interest in the landscape was really from the outset something I felt very comfortable with. And by going to the landscape regularly, 3 to 4 months a year, with my father, who's a geographer, and with the help of the farmers who I knew in the area, one of whom used to live in our cottage. He was semi-retired, but he was still working the land. He became my guide to the landscape itself, the trees, the flora, the fauna. And so I've got to understand the landscape and space as both process and structure. My father taught me about geology, morphology, and in his conversations about the landscape, he started mentioning this term called feng shui. And I said, what is that? He said, from Chinese, it's the way the Chinese people integrate where they live with the landscape around them. And he then talked to me about Taoism. And eventually in time, he led me on to read Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, which I'm still reading, and which opened up for me a whole new way of thinking. I'd read bits of the Bible. I'd read some religious texts. I was given various of them when I was younger. And the one that made sense to me was Lao Tzu's writings because it seemed somewhere between philosophy and spirituality. There was no sense of doctrine. It was very much to do with how we might, as individuals, accord with the universe and form a relationship with it. And in subsequent years, when I was playing rugby at school, which I didn't enjoy any ball sports games at all. I walked off the rugby field one day because I was fed up with playing the game and it was raining. My teacher told me to go and see the headmaster, who then told me about an idea he had because he knew that I was not afraid of exercise. It had to make sense to me. So he introduced me to my art teacher, who was now my judo teacher. And Jerry, my teacher, took me to the dojo and he put on the suit. He did all of the bowing. I said, what am I bowing for? He said, to the spirit of judo. And I said, what is judo? He said, it's wrestling, but it means gentle way. Judo means gentle way. not always gentle, but that's the essence of it, gentle way. He said, this is not about fighting, it's about how you control energy. When I did further research and did judo for 5 years and then went to university, I then joined a karate club. And I did Shotokan karate, and karate is way of the empty hand and foot. So I said, what is this way? And way was Tao. And when I was working as a martial artist, I'd always had this sense of a kind of synchronicity between what I learned physically and what I did intuitively, when I was fighting. And I found it very beautiful. There was an aesthetic to it. It was a beautiful thing. Fighting itself didn't interest me, but the energy control and the movements, and it was like a physical chess. It was very, very exciting to me. But this word way came into my way of thinking and my realm of understanding. And when I went back to the Chinese artists I was looking at and other painters, I began to realize that the way was really a profound system of understanding. When I looked into it further, I recognized that in the West, the Abrahamic traditions have the idea of a God who made the universe. And that's all fine. I can take that. But the idea for the Chinese was that there was an impersonal cosmic order. There was no personified being that made anything. We all come from something we call nothingness or no-thingness into being. And in the fullness of being, we experience all the energies of the world, the 10,000 things and beyond. And then if we're really lucky as artists, as writers, as cooks, or whatever it is our area of expertise or interest, we find a kind of resonance with the universe itself, a kind of connectedness. And I realized that painting was going to be a way in which I didn't just look at the world, it's how I looked at the world. And to quote Degas, it's not, painting is not what I see, it's what I help other people see. And that's really what became important to me, is that I have things I want to explore as a painter, making these things called images or using processes to create experiences. And so as I look back and forth from the West to the East, and I had a first look at the Ma Yuan, who's one of my favorites. I'm learning a lot about the sheer myriad of Chinese artists. It's still relatively new to me, so forgive me. There'll be things you know very well. But for me, when I first looked at this, I thought, well, firstly, it's got this beautiful edging to it. What happened to the square? What happened to the rectangles? They're gone. And it seemed very important that that gave me a whole different way of reading the image. And I realized that when we see in the landscape without any architecture around us, we see this way. We see through a world through a giant circle. As artists, we've always done that. But as human beings, what happened was when we moved from living in caves and to temporal shelters and built structures, we created doors and windows. That changed everything. Because up to that point, we were in space. The edge of us was the beginning of infinity. Now we have these things called buildings, which become measurable distances between ourselves and infinity. And in art terms, we have this intermediary section, an element we tend to work on, which will tell us certain things. Now, the Chinese recognized there's different ways of formatting. So if you play with that idea, laterally, vertically, you can begin to think about things in different ways. Now, in the West, the vertical painting historically often was denoting the figural, and the latitudinal or the horizontal was generally spatial or landscape. But in Western traditions, a landscape had often been painted as a realm for human beings to occupy, not a realm in which human beings were allowed to be, but which they dominated. Chinese painting, for me, straight away, seemed to be recognizing that the artist paints from their body into space. The Western artist, up to the birth of landscape and abstraction, paints from space towards the body. So this difference becomes really important to me. Ma Yuan, again, the paintings of water and clouds were, to me, exemplifications of a landscape which was not descriptive. It wasn't telling me details about a lake that he went to. It was about an almost mesmeric reverie where the energies of the universe in the form of water that reflected and moved in unique ways was the exemplification of Tao. So the chi of the universe was manifesting through the Tao in many, many forms. The natural rhythms and energies of the world were what in part Ma was interested in. The other thing here is that the white space in Chinese painting began to intrigue me because I thought, this is not simply where nothing is. There's moments of water, there's moments of vapor, there are signs, signatures, symbols, calligraphy, which are poetical to do with ownership, they're to do with human presence, but they're temporal. Even though they're very dramatic, they do not destroy, they enhance the vastness of the image itself, in my opinion. And it gives an account that the white space we're looking there is actually immeasurable. So we go from a surface into nothingness back to a moment of possible measure. And these are very powerful forms of experience which began to have a profound effect upon me. So in my various ways, I started working with the idea of the landscape, which was both a state of mind as much as it was geographical. People have asked me several times today and often before, a perfectly valid question is, do I know what I'm doing before I started, in the sense of having an image which I then begin to create? No is the answer. Every one of the works in this room is an improvisation. I know certain forms are going to interest me, certain orientations will interest me, and that's it. I start with a completely raw surface. I use transparent materials to mark the surface. I do what I call a ghost drawing. Then I leave it, I come back to it several days later, and I stain it with ink. And the ink penetrates the canvas where there wasn't any medium, and suddenly I get differentiation in the surfaces. And that begins to set me into motion of creating a visual experience. And I'm not going to use the word image, because each one of you in this room is a living entity. If I photograph you, you become an image. If I draw you, become an image. So my painting isn't an image of anything. It's an abstraction of the natural world. And in a sense, it is in a sense both unique as it is referential. But I want them to be always, I'm not an abstract painter, I abstract the natural world and its properties. And in so doing, I hope to give enough access so that people feel some familiarity, but also some uncertainty. Because what I'm also interested in doing is the opposite of what advertising does, which is to go, this is what it's all about, get it or lose it. I'm not interested in that. Some artists are, and that's good. For me, no. I want to create something which has, either you walk away uninterested or you stay there and try and work out what it is you're seeing. And if you do that, then I've held your attention. The process of my painting doesn't end till you have enough comprehension of what it means to you, not to me, to you. And that's the process of art to me, is it's a currency of communication at all times. I start rather like going on a journey with a general idea and then see where it takes me. I don't have a destination. And if you equate it to like traveling on a plane, I like to think I'm on the runway. If I'm the pilot, I'm on the runway and we're about to take off, destination unknown. We're not landing. So again, Yuan, the emptiness of this seemingly, this is very fascinating to me, because the many aspects of art is about this idea of what is it that I'm seeing. And I think, ironically, a lot of the time as a visual artist, what we're painting, even when we paint a figure, a beloved, a mountain, a hill, a tree, whatever it is, it's actually everything but that that's actually interesting us. That is like a beginning of an understanding rather than an arrival point. And so this idea of what we see as nothingness or quietude is an access point that's very, very important. It's not good or bad, don't get me wrong, but for me, when I look at these paintings, there's an openness here which is far removed from the measurable everyday life. This is a place I can contemplate and move to, and that is what holds my attention. So doing these things I'm reaching points where I'm trying to archive consciousness. Now, going back to the chi was now vapor, breath. And in karate and in judo, it was this idea of an energy that you hold on to, you utilize and direct in various ways. But like electricity, it has all this force, but you can only feel it. You can't see it. You see it only, for me, when the throw is right, when the movement is right, or when the color is right, and things begin to coalesce. And there's a hint of what might be there. And this idea of absolute truth and reality, which to me, the Chinese mind is often reflecting on, as are other cultures, but the Chinese do it in a way that I find accessible. And in the Zen aspect, when Chan Buddhism became Zen Buddhism in Japan and took from China that aspect of its culture, the resistance to language becomes interesting too, because in the art world, we naturally have a lot of language and it's very important. But at some point, when we're painters or visual creators, there's a point where language has no resonance. It has no place. It's very important, but it is not, to me, the defining element. The moment your eye alights on a visual phenomena that you see and takes you to places, then you begin to have, hopefully, a meaningful experience. Keep coming back to Yuan, because every time I see these paintings, I feel how utterly modern they are, as well as how ancient they are. And then I started thinking about, having worked with students from both Asia and from the Middle East, how often in the work of those artists, there was an attribute we'll touch on later that was beginning to haunt me. Now, I'm showing you these because these are rarely seen. This is a work by Degas, who, as you know, is a great painter of ballet dancers and modern life in Paris in the late 19th century. But these are extraordinary monoprints he did on the Normandy coast. And to me, they're ultra contemporary abstractions. They're nature-based, but he has found them. He understood the processes. He was a wonderful draftsman. He could, determine, describe, initiate ideas about the body like very few artists of his era. But in this work, he forgoes all of that to speak to an atmosphere and a sense of energy of the universe, which is quite profoundly, to me, roughly said, Asiatic in its orientation. This piece here is another example of this sort of minimal approach, very evocative, reduced color. He was a wonderful colorist. And this, the color is highly tertiary, very reduced, and reminded me more of a Chinese palette of certain dynastic orders. But again, subtle temperature changes were also available there. So you move into the Northern Sung painters and Southern Sung painters. To me, I realized the difference was to do with verticality as opposed to horizontality. But in every instance was this idea of, and I began to realize there are very distinct structures in the calligraphy of China is a foundation of visual painting in China. And I began to think, well, so in the West, we had picture making, and then we came up with writing. But in China, picture making and writing were born of the same moment, and calligraphy is the connecting element. And I thought that was just fantastic. Cultures, Japan, Korea, etc., have their own vision, but China was the birthing point for my understanding of that meeting between what is pictograph as opposed to picture, the idea of what is a written form as opposed to what is a visual form. And that, to me, made me realize their sense of abstraction that we have in the West arguably is often bound on to do with the limitations of language, not so much a visual process, but how we perceive the world. So the abstract naturally exists in any image that once an image is made of a tree, a duck, or whatever, they are not real anymore, they are images, but they're also extractions from a real. And we accept the cipher-like graphic elements as the foundations of our understanding of an otherwise rich visual experience. And so this, to me, was fascinating, how you had a culture which could have this idea of language and visuality in concert. Now, Fan Kuan's painting, this is not a good slide of a magnificent painting, but there is, for me, when I first saw this image, I've yet to see the real thing, but the reproductions I've seen and the prints I've seen of it led me to realize that Chinese perspective is actually, there's two types. There's the sort of orthogonal structural perspective architects used, and then there's the deep, mid, and far distance of Chinese perspective. People think there's no Chinese perspective. There is Chinese perspective. It is just different than Western, and it's different in a very interesting way. And we touch on something here, which is now here, the reason mountains were painted, when I discovered the Chinese had no translatable term for landscape, but mountain water, and I realized that mountain water was an exemplification of Taoist principles of yin yang, dragon veins, and all these other aspects of a cosmology where the pictures are manifesting states of mind. When these paintings are made, they're not paintings of a mountain, they're paintings of mountainness. They're paintings of magnitude, of majesty and beauty. And in the West, what would be a phallic symbol is softened in China by virtue of the presence of the clouds, which in the cosmology is exhaled air of the earth, the male and female in concert, defining and redefining each other. So here, this was nature is the realm. And in China, nature is the measure of things. In the West, man is the measure of things, primarily, fundamentally, historically, as I understand it. And China's acceptance of the beauty and power of the natural world was something those artists want to explore and exemplify. Now, jumping back now to England, there's a Russian-British painter, Alexander Cousins, who when I saw these works, I was very excited. I saw them when I was just beginning to work more abstractly with the landscape. And this was done from the 1690s by this Russian English painter. And they're called ink block techniques. And he would get paper and put it onto surfaces of ink or watercolor and bang it onto clean white paper arbitrarily, and then see what happened. And then he would say, okay, now I have a landscape. And he would often build these landscapes up but more often than not, he would leave them just like this, which was at the time extraordinarily advanced. Then I saw work with Chitao, and I thought, well, he wasn't doing the same thing, but there's something that approximates. I thought, wow, for all the difference of intention, there's a property of connectedness. I think here we come to the idea of what is intention as opposed to what is arbitrary. And for the Western artists, there's a very different way of structuring the world artistically. The Chinese, I think, have innately understood this idea that the image is basically the meeting point between oneself and the energies of the universe. The chi element is what animates the image. And the idea of the improvisational spontaneous is also very important in Chinese painting. When I first started trying to do calligraphy, and I realized you can't make any mistakes that you can cover. So it's like, okay, and the teacher will come and go, that's not right. You can't erase anything. So this idea of becoming so confident and competent, but without killing the idea of spontaneity, is the balance between precision and the unknown. And in Chinese painting, I realized they were working on this edge of physical technical capability and poetic improvisation. So by contrast, the obviously sort of mechanical nature of this work is, arguably less spirited than the Xitao. But my point is, the black and white images go, there's something about the skeletal aspect which I think is intriguingly close. So I went to Huangshan in about 96 with a group of students and was mesmerized by the landscape, of course, and saw the dawn, the ocean of clouds, just after the ocean of clouds. And we saw they took these little Polaroids, which were taken from the top of the mountain early in the morning. And then when I'm painting several years later, I realize when I'm painting it, that that's not what I'm painting, but that is in my mind. So the paintings are often a form of memory, not memorialization so much as memory revisited. And in the moment of improvisation, things come in and I intuitively think, this has to be hard, this has to be soft. And I try to work in such a way, working with a lateral orientation. What I learned looking at Chinese painting was that the scroll painting in Japan and China have different or sort of specific meanings, but essentially it's the idea of, with the hand scroll, which I understand is basically a shoulder width opening, and you read, fold up, and then read the next, going from left or right to left rather. In the West, we go this way when we read, China goes in another direction. So I thought, interesting. Then I started thinking about this idea within all of this of the scroll being a timepiece. And I began to realize then painting itself is a time or chronicle, an event which is archived. Consciousness becomes archived in the making of a painting. And so in doing a piece at any given moment, I was also dealing with this idea of how darkness in the West is often the abode of mystery, and light is the light historically of God coming into the world and illuminating the darkness. But China, because of its use of paper and silk, is using white as light and void. And void in the West has implications which can be very negative in a nihilist sense. But what I learned from looking through the Eastern lens was, in fact, the void is the origin and point of return, from which everything emerges, to which everything will return, an ongoing process. So the making of a painting then became less bound to the idea of completion, but a kind of process of each painting I do is connected to the one that went before at some point, not a distinct connection like stanzas in a poem, but all the work in here is part of a continuous sensibility. And sometimes I'm orientating some directions more landscapey, sometimes more towards the idea of spatiality, or what I might even be spirit. What I'm being intrigued by is this idea of, when does emotion end and spirituality begin? How do those two things connect? Now, going to other artists in the West, Gordon Onslow Ford is a very important artist from England originally, but spent most of his life in abroad in Paris, and then in Mexico, then in Inverness, here in California. And he's a unique individual. He was part of the Surrealist group, and he and Roberto Matta met in Paris. And he was very interested in Surrealism because he was interested in the unconscious. But in the process of doing that, he realized that much Surrealism was bound to the idea of narrative, sexuality, and politics. And those things weren't of interest. The unconscious was interesting to him and to Matta. So he and Matta left the Surrealist group amicably, but they separated, and he started the experience of automatic Surrealism. the idea of working improvisationally and spontaneously. And he came up with the idea of line, circle, dot as something which was to him foundational to painting, which produced works of extraordinary quality. And to me, these have, they're not calligraphy, but there's something where I see some aspects of steles I've seen in China. They don't have the same, there's not the written language possibilities, but there's an energy field, they've come close. He used a special kind of acrylic, and he was doing pouring techniques, arguably before Jackson Pollock did them, but he was influential on a lot of the abstract expressionists who looked to the East for a lot of information about how they might approach painting. These are my own drawings I did when I was a judo player, and I would go to the club, and I became interested in Hokusai's manga drawings of his daily life in Japan, and I loved the idea of notating quick motions. So I started working with the figure moving, and I became fascinated by that. I was doing landscapes, and then I was doing the figure and doing judo and karate. Here's Mark Toby, another very important American painter that went to Japan. He went to Hangzhou, and he went to Kyoto, and he studied calligraphy there, and he came back to the West, and he started his own white calligraphic paintings. And here he was a Baha'i follower and a Zen practitioner and a Taoist, and he was interested in trying to see if the Western mind could appreciate the sensibility of Chinese mind in producing images or visual fields, I'm going to call them. This is a painter, Gary Ragg, and I find him an interesting artist because when I was in my graduate school, he was quite popular in London at that time, and his whole thing being he'd been to China, was fascinated by Chinese calligraphy and did it quite astutely, but then wanted to not just be a calligrapher, but bring that energy back to paintings he did in the West. So these are oil paintings he did, quite large scale, 9 by 9 feet, all of them based on body movements and calligraphic extensions. Peter Lanyon, who's a Cornish painter, very much a landscape painter, had no knowledge to my understanding of Chinese art per se, but was very literate and well-read, and did have knowledge of Taoism and Zen ideas, which I think creep into his work. He was fundamentally a landscape painter like I feel I am, but he actually was a glider pilot, would fly over the landscape and come back to the studio and paint what he'd say, not what he'd seen, what he felt, what he was sensing. So my images, these are me photographed by a friend doing my kata and karate poses, which were giving me information about the form dissolving. This became very important to me, the dissolving of form and structure. Another very important painter, Georges Mathieu, a French art informal movement in the 1950s. People often think it's like the abstract expressionists in Paris, but they're not. It was a distinct movement which was to do more with an internal meditative way of being. And even though he was very sort of theatrical, his work is extremely calligraphic in its nature in terms of his attempt of understanding how to hold energy and place it into a larger realm. He would paint in front of people. Frankenthaler, one of the earliest of the abstract expressionist painters, going through this process where, again, China, often people work horizontally rather than vertically. In the West, we generally work like this. China, you generally work like that. So the Western artists, unwittingly, were beginning to work more where the idea of up and down changes if you're working horizontally than if you're working with gravitational fields. Pollock, that's the most well-known of, but not necessarily the best. But these are all interesting artists because I think they were trying something here. We have the idea of ink splash painting from China, coulage painting by Gordon Onslow Ford, and Pollock here is playing with the idea the brush is not the contact. In China, the brush is very, very significant when the contact. For the brush not to be in touch is quite radical. So Pollock's throwing of the paint, which people think of as crazy or wild, is a little unusual, but it actually has a certain kind of poetry to it. But it's unique. If you try doing these paintings, they look like failed Pollocks. But what he did was release the idea of the artist having to work on the surface, which is always vertical. And this way, he just took away the idea of up and down, and here, so an overall field of energy is what he's actually archiving. And these are processes of archiving states of mind, not depicting or describing something, but in a sense like moving and leaving a trace of the movement, pure and simply. This is my first attempt at semi-abstract art, and it's an awful painting really, but I like it because it was important to me, and it shows my journey from the certainty of the figure into the figure in space. And again, the chi element in the karate I was learning, the chi element was the ki in Japan is chi in China, and these are animating elements in the work. And I thought the moving figure and a seeming dissolving of it. Then I started looking at this and I realized I was becoming very geometric, which is almost like proto-cubism, which wasn't bad, but it wasn't what I wanted. So I kept playing with it. It's a 7x7 painting, which is done on a very soft white ground with Chinese ink and acrylic paint together. And the idea here is I'm dissolving the form so it becomes a field of energy. I made little sculptures of the movements I did as a karateka so I could see them as physical forms. Then, about that time, I saw an exhibition of Persian miniatures in London. And I looked at this painting, amongst many others, and Chinese paintings, which are showing in the next room. And I thought to myself, so if we look at the Mediterranean in right at the time of the Renaissance, and you put a line through the middle, north and south, to the west or the east of that line, across the eastern Mediterranean, all the way across the coast of China, off to the coast of America, but on America, painting is shadow-free. If you come to the line to the west of that line, all the way across Europe, all the way across America to the California coast, it's shadow-bound. Why? Why aren't there any shadows in this world? They have sunlight, they have lots of sunlight, but no shadows. China has shadow puppetry. Indonesia has shadow puppetry, but Chinese art has very few shadows. So why is this? I was confused, perplexed, and excited when I realized this, that this is shadow-free. In essence, in up to the 20th century I'm talking about. And then I thought, well, the Abrahamic traditions have the God that makes the universe, everything in it. And then the heliocentricity of the sun, the body centricity of Western art, was all about the body. And it was also about time and controlling time. But in Asia, various aspects of it, including the idea of reincarnation, was the idea of a cyclical energy rather than a linear energy with an endpoint. So timelessness was the interest of these artists. The timeless and the eternal. And the moment of being within a continuum becomes really critical. So these are about both a stillness and an everlasting quality, which to me were mesmeric and poetic. The Armenian painter Ashar Gorky was one of my great heroes when I was turning towards abstraction. And he knew little or nothing that I know from my own readings of Chinese art, though he would have been no doubt aware of it. To me, this has an almost Asiatic sense, and I use that term in the broadest possible sense. But in this case, in this instance, shadow-free, he also melded abstraction and figuration. The energy, he was continually drawing plants and other things. You go to landscape and will come back to New York and make these paintings, which are really to do with his own ancestry, coming from Armenia. He had to flee there because of Turkish invasion and genocide. He had to flee Armenia to come to America. His paintings were all about the past, his past, an ancestral sense. But in them were these biomorphic forms, biological forms which are generative, and they're born out of a surrealist capacity for dreaming and in transforming known forms into new ways of seeing and being. Gorky was very influential for me and liberating. So the paintings I was doing, I came back from various trips. I've been to Iceland, I've been to the Himalaya, I've been to China many times, Europe often, still many more places to go, but each one is a time of great reflection. And so the paintings become, in a sense, a form of archiving of experiences. The other thing that's influential on me is some films, film in general, but these films, Lost Horizon, here, and Black Narcissus are all Western films about Eastern world. And they're done with, I think, enormous amount of respect for that different culture. And the film Black Narcissus, which is a religious film, as well as the Lost Horizon, which is more of a utopian vision of the world, is fascinating to me because the landscape was giving the kind of essence of what was being talked about here. So my own journey in Hangzhou was to go in part with students to teach, have them be taught calligraphy. So I tried it myself, and these are my first 2 attempts at calligraphy. And the teacher said, these are worth keeping. So he let me frame them and have them mounted. And it gave me the realization that this is an extremely complex process, but one which fascinated me. And I think it's something I need to look into further. But again, my intention is not to try to paint like Chinese person paints, but to try to understand essences of what the Chinese artists are doing. She is the constant, like in the historic painting, to some degree in some modern painting, but for the most part, for me, in the Chinese historic painting, is the exemplification of chi energy and landscape. So then I saw this Li Yuan Chia, rather, Taiwanese artist, an exhibition in my hometown with a group of artists. He was part of a group called the Eight Outlaws that in the 50s in Taipei began to bring abstraction to Taiwan. And so I saw this work and I was excited because I thought on one hand, it's like, what is this? I'd never seen anything like it. I'd seen work by Paul Klee and others which had a little similarity. This was not pure calligraphy, but it was born of calligraphic sensibilities. And it was extremely exciting to me to see it. So my own journey to the mountains of the Himalayas, so this is Chola, which I crossed on an expedition with a trekking company. We didn't climb, but we were trekking. And I wanted to go to a landscape which was dominated by, in this case, the Buddhist sensibility. And I'm very interested with landscapes being the idea of how they exemplify and how they create art of certain types. Now we're all here from different parts of the world, ancestrally or recently living what we now call America, and we go traveling and we see various things if we're lucky enough to. Where do we actually belong and where do we decide is home? So the landscape is always, one second. Thank you. Always in me as I am in it. And my work is often relating to this idea. When I was on this particular expedition, I was at a place like this. And in fact, we were looking at Everest at that point. And I became extremely overwhelmed by lots of things happening in my life that were very emotional. And I was sort of crying and emotionalizing a lot. And then I became very, very calm. And I'm looking around me at these peaks. And I was at about 18,000 feet, like 6,000 meters. Breathing was not easy, it wasn't difficult, but you had to be concentrating on your breathing. And I'm looking at the landscape, and then I just felt this overwhelming sense of expansion. And I thought, oh, this is why I've come here. Now, space is becoming infinity, and time is becoming eternity. And the Jeremy Morgan standing here, is but one moment in the vastness of time. And I'm very lucky to be aware of that. Now I have to take this back. And when I make paintings, I want to visit this moment again. And slowly I came back into the world, very much blissful, walked down the mountain, and many of my companions had a similar experience. It was wonderful. I saw the mandala of various types. This is a whole other talk, but I have no expertise in this, but deep interest in it. What it informed me about was this idea of the world of art, which is found on what I see as opposed to what I know or what I understand. So the conceptual aspect of mandala painting, in terms of obviously its teaching role as for Buddhist enlightenment, but also as an optical artifact, is astonishing, and in its abstractness, arguably more truthful than any kind of depiction might be. This is a view I had of Everest when I was there, right in the middle up there at the top. I was standing on this place, which is Kalapatar. And when I came back, I was trying to make paintings which weren't directly about mountains, but had that sense of airiness and light. Now, the chi that I was, thinking about in the landscape was very evident to me. I spoke to my Buddhist guide, Siddhar, who was a practicing Buddhist, and he knew about Taoism, and he was explaining to me his understandings of it. But sitting in a landscape with somebody who, for them, was seeing through that lens was fascinating. I don't follow any religious doctrine, or I'm not practicing anything, but I read a lot and I think a lot in both Buddhistic and Taoist terms, and I'm trying to understand it more. Painting is a way I'm beginning to understand it better. Pat Steer is an American artist who's done many, many projects, but she did a whole series when she realized the significance of water and its symbolic significance to Chinese thinking and being. Tao in particular, she wanted to manifest paintings which were her explorations of the Tao as best she could. And again, I think these are fascinating experiments, and I'd love to meet her and talk to her. I don't have the opportunity to do that yet, but I'd like to know what she went through. But the paintings, I think, were ambitious and quite exciting. My own work then began to play with the idea of where light comes into play as opposed to darkness as being the abode of the mysterious and the unknown. And this idea of the mystical as opposed to the mysterious has always been an ongoing interest. So I really believe the more I do paintings, that what I'm painting is something which is what I'm going to call the invisibility of consciousness. And I think Taoism and consciousness have a close proximity. They're not the same, but the consciousness of Taoism is an animating, sentient awareness of which one becomes part. And as a painter, I hope to find my way to resonating as best I can with that. Not as an idea, but a lived reality. When I looked at the Chinese artists working with permission, making a painting, and I saw the application of the ink to the paper, I realized wonderfully at that moment, the ink was being ground by her. The brush was now containing her breath. She had the liquid paint that was once her breath is now liquid coming to the paper, where it gets pushed into the paper and it goes into the paper. In the West, we do this, but China does that. And it goes into space. And I thought, ah. So the surface of the painting, beyond the obvious, is actually the beginning point of infinity. Whereas in the West, we project this idea of the two vanishing points, the eye of the beholder, the vanishing point of the painting. Therefore, the West's spectatorial depth. Chinese painting is invitational. Come in to have the experience. And they're just different ways of orienting. They're not better or worse, but they're different. And that difference is what I'm interested in. These are all 5 by 6 feet. That's the size of these larger paintings, basically. And I like working on various scales, and I'm going to explore more ranges and orientations. But large paintings, sometimes I want them to be immersive, primarily. So this is Tapies, one of the great Catalan painters, sadly left us about 3 years ago. Deeply involved in Eastern philosophy, Zen Buddhism, Sufism, Chan Buddhism, and was calligraphically trained and then wanted to sort of experiment on his own, which is what he did. But he did many things. But he said essentially for him that painting was to be considered as a portal. You move from the world of the known topographies of reality through its substances into the inner occult world of being. And I thought that's perfect. That says a lot that I can resonate with. To go beyond the obvious into the inner world of something, which is what Gordon Oslo Ford tried to do and various other abstract artists have tried to do. Move beyond the surface and go into. And some artists need to do that. This is Henri Michaud, who again has a kind of calligraphic aspect to this. It's not pure calligraphy, but calligraphic as mark making with a brush. He was a poet, and he took a lot of drugs to experiment with liberating his mind until the doctor said, your paintings will be better if you're not taking drugs. So he said, okay, he stopped taking drugs and they were better eventually. So Bryce Marden, who did paintings based on a Cold Mountain poem, a Chinese poem, his adventures, he was a minimalist, so he got very intrigued by calligraphy, which is really arguably quite opposite to minimalism. But he got intrigued by it and did a series of experiments, which I think are interesting. I'm not always sure how successful they are, but there's serious intention to understand the sensibility of another culture. But this is chi energy in that sense, the idea of the form itself giving, the energy itself giving rise to form. What I began to realize the more I was doing these paintings, with the Chinese work that I loved was often on silk or on paper. And there's often many Chinese artists now whose work I like, who are oil painters or acrylic painters, but the ones that were painting on the traditional surfaces recently or earlier created a surface which becomes silent. And the silence of the silk. I love the shine of things, but that can often be disruptive when you're trying to see it. This one is very, very flat. It's all silk and it's all acrylic. And it has a kind of quietude, which is something I'm very excited by. Phenomena I've been really moved by was the Northern Lights. I went to see the Aurora Borealis in Canada. The first time I went, I spent 7 hours for 7 nights seeing nothing but stars. And I realized when I came home that nature is not an entertainment center, that you have to go out and wait and see what nature will provide for you. So I went again 2 years later, and this happened. And it happened a lot. And I was beyond description. The energy of the sun is coming into the magnetosphere, the pole we're nearest to, the North Pole. It happens on the Southern Pole too. And these extraordinary light forms happen, which have an energy that's unique. I've never seen anything like it. It was seemingly alive. My own work then exploring on a larger scale, trying to look to Chinese paintings in terms of what I was sensing, qualities of activity and non-activity. Going again back to the Sung Dynasty painting, I realized within the near, deep, and far distance perspective structures of Chinese painting is this incredible sense of there's a here and now, and there's a then and there, and in between is eternity. And I thought, this is, because that should be there, but it's not. It actually embraces both. It hovers between. And that was a revelation to me, and I began to explore that possibility. What we think of as nearness and farness, the knowable or the unknowable. Painting ultimately becomes archiving consciousness. Tao is manifest in painting. Chinese painting is manifestation of Tao. Can I do in the West something that the Chinese artists do? And I hope I can. I'm trying respectfully to do that because it's not my culture, but I have a passion for it. I'm learning about it, and its sensibilities resonate with me. So how can I respectfully and honestly interact with another culture and come up with something which is recognizing both my tradition and tradition of another culture, and comes up with something which might be somewhere in between. Working on the silk, I got to points where I was getting more of a quietness in the painting that I was after. These again are several layers. Painting is a chronicle of time, as well as an exploration or possible expression of space. All of the paintings in here are improvised. Nothing is planned. So they grow by my interactions with them. And then they reach a point where I was used the quote by Rothko when asked, when is a painting finished, which most artists have trouble defining. He said, when I see the painting as if for the first time, I think then I am a stranger to it. It must be done. My work here is done. And he can leave it. And I like that idea. But what I learn from Chinese painting constantly is this idea of the evocation of things, suggestion, indistinctness. And when they come back now to, we'll see Turner and Monet in a minute, I'd like to explain a little further about why I'm thinking these things and what that means. Let me just see. This is a new material I'm using. I'm doing a lot of experiments with, not to replace what I'm doing, to add to the oeuvre. This is alcohol ink painting, which is a very great smelly substance, but it moves in very beautiful ways. You don't do anything with your hand. You put it on the surface, which is doesn't absorb, and you move the paper to create the energy of the image. This is the artist. This is the painting you said, Xinhua, that sold recently. Yeah, a great deal of money. Now, another Chinese artist now who came to the West and did remarkable work, utilizing. He came from his world to what I'm going to call my world, and and I've come from my world to and on the way to his. And so I feel an affinity with this gentleman. I'm excited to see more of his work and know more about what he actually did. But I love these migrations from, he comes from a certain tradition. My understanding was he was a great copyist, and it was Picasso that inspired him to do his own work. And with that prompt, he started doing his own work and became enormously successful. My own work, again, I'm using now gold and other materials to, if I like the idea, gold, it in fact comes from out of this world, like most of us here, in essence, but it's a substance that came into our planet. It wasn't part of the planet when it was created. So I find gold to be a fascinating symbol I'm beginning to play with in terms of its implications. Now, briefly, Monet and Turner. So my own thoughts are that, and this is not historical fact, is my surmising as I've looked at these things. Monet painted water. He meant many things, but water was his main interest. And the surface of his painting, if you'll notice, this is from the L'Orangerie in Paris. You know, this is a circular room. This is a vast mural which encompasses. And in that, he takes away the foreground and the foreground. There is no horizon, no foreground. There's only space, which is the sky above, the lotus leaves themselves and the flowers. This is an incredibly powerful painting. And what he's doing is, when he was asked by his dealer, what do you paint? You paint women with parasols and children in gardens and ice flows and cathedrals. What is your subject matter? He said, space between me and the thing I see is all I paint. And I thought that was beautiful. And what it really meant was, as an impressionist painter, again, not depiction, evocation, hint, suggestion, not a declaration, but a possibility. And what he does is he creates a chromatic field of nothingness. This, to me, is visual Buddhism. The subatomic world vibrating around him. The sky above we can only infer by what's shown below. The water underneath through which the plants grow. This is all the elements of the chi, the vapors, the breath. And then we go a few years back to Turner himself, and he is dissolving the world into a morass of energy, which is vaporous, light-filled. Water is ice, cloud, mist, smoke. Any number of forms are all co-joined in his work. And he's dissolving the world into a kind of subatomic realm where distinctness and is not, discerning difference is not important. Unity is important. And that's where he's taking. So with the new paintings I'm playing with, I've got here a video coming up shortly, I think. These are small drawings I do about the size of this. Then I scan them with the help of friends who know more than I do up to a larger scale, and I print them onto things that are sizable as some of these paintings. Then I paint back into them. I'm interested here in the flow. Now, can I play this as a video? Where's our assistant? Harry here? Oh, I think. Oh, here we go. That's big. Is it playing? Yeah, it's playing. Okay. So this is me filming it while I'm painting it. I'm trying to make it while I'm filming with my camera. So the quality of the film is not great, but I'm excited by the motion it creates. And so I want to make more of these where I'm going to make videos. So I'm actually capturing the making of the painting, the flow itself. This to me is chi of sorts, which I'm capturing in these little videos. They become pieces eventually, which I then can frame and sell, but the video is unique because they're in the process of happening. And my hand is not, I'm only moving paper to make the image move. So the stillness and then the movement, it to me is very exciting. And this is one I think is one of here. This when I'm done a painting, that once up there on the wall, I will obviously photograph them. I usually put them on post them on Instagram, but it's a way for me to re-see the painting because it's, you know, you're going able to scan, so you don't look at the whole thing. Because when we look, we scan and then we focus. And painting too often tries to do what a camera does with a narrow field of vision. This gives you multiplicity. And so for me, it helps me when I remake paintings, when I've gone through them, photographing this way, gives me a new sense of understanding the spatial possibilities. This is just a show I had in China, in Chongqing, with my friend Ren Ming in 2019, right before COVID hit. We were actually going to have a show in Wuhan in March of 2020, which of course got cancelled. But this is in Chongqing, in Sichuan Academy of Fine Art, invited us to have a show. So that was very exciting. And I took all of these paintings in a ski bag, and then we stretched them up in China. It's very exciting. Cost me $100 to ship the paintings, and then a lot of stretching in China. Another one, Shandong, where 4 of us showed together in Shandong Museum, a wonderful exhibition. They had a beautiful job with the presentation. Very excited. he went there for a big presentation. Very interesting. And so this, I think, is the last image. It's just one of the ink pieces I'm doing. Again, I want to combine the alcohol ink painting with regular acrylic painting is my goal, but the videos are going to be part of another exploration. But for me, it's just an expansion. Everything I do, I just add to. I don't replace things. I just want to expand the way we can, because this will affect the way I make my regular paintings too over time. But the ink has a flow to it, which I think is very exciting. I need to explore that further. And that is the end. Thank you for your attention.
We'll have a Q&A session after all the speakers. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the informative and inspiring lecture. We learned a lot.
Thank you.
I think we all learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take this.
Thank you. Good.
Anything else?
They come that way. Yeah. Where shall I sit? Back there?
Okay. Next we have here. Okay. Oh, okay. This way. I'm not in the first. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Next, we have Mr. Liu Rongqian, RCA, Royal Canadian Academy, member of the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts. So he's in Montreal. He will speak in Chinese, yeah. I think, and he can also speak in English and French. You choose.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'll close this and have him. Screen share window is closed. Okay, here I'll pin him for everybody and spotlight for everyone. Okay. Okay. So 有字幕吗？它 Zoom 里面没有本身没有带字幕的。
有声音的啊。
英文的跟中文。
在这个，我看看。对。
下个星期的是可以有 Zoom 吗？
我看一下啊。
他这有中前的文字呢？
我听得见。
我们先请刘先生开始讲。我们先请刘院士讲吧。
听得见吗？
声音不是很大，要再响一点。
好，我换一个这个。
The virtual background is his photograph.
Okay.
It's always snowing in Montreal.
现在听得见吗？好一点没有？声音好一点没有？
还是很小声。
还是小声啊？
听得见，没有问题。
对。
听得见是吧？好。
听得见，没有问题。
没有问题啊，林教授说没有问题。
是没有问题。
好的，
谢谢。
听得见 ，OK。
我在加拿大，我是刘荣全。这个我以前没有看过摩根先生的作品。苏馆长不久之前把这个他的画册还没有完成的画册传给我。我就像以前的，我收到去年我收到这个于崇信我的学长的 画册一样，我一想，好家伙，这个天下没有一个没有一个这个免费的午餐，果然这个苏馆长就派任务给我了，叫我今天讲几句话。那么我本来呢，我想用这个手机没有电了，或者是文件打不开了，来来来想逃脱这个讲话，因为因为大家都知道我不善语言，这个我也不是专业的教授，像刚刚这个摩根教授讲的，他可以一直在讲，而且可以不停的讲，我没有这个本事，而且我也不是专家。我也没有学过，没有看过太多的理论的书，和这个这个艺术史什么，所以我今天呢，只能用一个非常简单的语言，用我的直觉来讲，因为我这些年来我是以摄影相机来画画，或者是写诗。所以这个我讲的呢，也有一点受摄影的眼光，同时呢，我这个话讲的，说我讲英语啊、法语啊、中文，没有一样讲的好了，因为我离开东方太久了，可是到了西方又太迟了，所以我就是典型的叫做竹子。什么叫做竹子呢？就是两边不同，中西文化都不同，中间是空的。所以我今天讲的东西呢，就是一个以摄影的角度去看这个欣赏摩根先生的作品。首先我很重要的一句话就是说，我非常喜欢摩根先生的作品。这个在我打开这个文件的时候，就是这个文件夹的时候，苏馆长给我文件的时候，我真是眼睛一亮，我就觉得好像我是从一个徕卡的照相机的镜头看到的东西，怎么样形容呢？我这个试试看怎么形容它，就是我看到非常精致的、有深度的、难以捉摸的、充满想象空间的一个世界。摩根先生呢有3点我简单讲一下，的作品讲一下。一个呢是摩根先生在作品中呢，我看到摩根先生的在作品里面的对光的处理，尤其是他这个半抽象和抽象化的处理，在一般抽象化的，我就总是觉得缺少对光的一种处理，缺少光。也许摩根先生也是听说他也是摄影家，所以这个他对这个光的处理是非常震撼，非常难得的。第二点呢，我也看到这个摩根先生的这个小传，我看了一下，当然他是受了这个西方传统的，这没有什么话说了，这西方传统的学院派的训练，而且他受到这个东方的这个哲学的影响。当然他刚刚讲的关于气啊，这个关于道家这些道家这个我们东方这些道家的影响啊，这些在我在这个艺术创造上面也有了60-70年的经验，越在里面越走进去的话，越不敢讲艺术。我现在问我艺术是什么，我也讲不出来了。那你要叫我讲 我也打太极拳也打了50-60年了。你现在叫我讲气，叫我讲阴阳，我也不敢讲了。所以我这个我只能是说，摩根先生的他对的这个对东西文化这个中间的这个影响呢，我只能说，好像摩根先生的作品呢是一个自由恋爱，就是两厢情愿的中西合璧把它做出来的，而不像我们中国的所谓的叫做媒妁之言呢，就说要讲媒，把它有点勉强，要慢慢的融合，不管怎么样都觉得有点怪。我觉得这个摩根先生这一点，把这个中西结合，这是互受影响，是非常了不起的。另外当然我也看的这个画册，就有一个精美的画册，是吧？这个画册里面的东西，我看的这个作品，我看了之后呢，我觉得他是一个摩根先生呢，他的作品呢，他是一个创作的旅程是渐进的，慢慢很自然的，不是勉强的，而且完全不追求时尚的。他是一个非常自信，而且创作非常诚恳的一个艺术家，非常了不起。如果用一个简单的一句话形容摩根先生表现的方式呢，我先讲好，我不是艺术评论家，我只能就这样说是一个抽象的写实，应该算是一个抽象的写实。人生呢，最先是做加法，由无到有，从简到繁，然后呢再做减法，从繁到简，完成一个圆满的人生。我希望艺术也是，我相信的，艺术也是一样。我希望在不久的将来，我会看到这个摩根先生的作品慢慢简化起来，浓缩起来。我就说到这样子，大家都知道啊。另外，大家都知道，这个硅谷艺术中心呢，要去展览的这个门槛是很高的。80岁以上的艺术家呢，只能算是少年；90、100岁的艺术家呢，算是中年。我跟先生70岁都不到，还不到70岁是吧？属于青少年，所以他这个现在就能够登堂入室了，所以他的前途无量。我再讲一遍，我非常喜欢摩根先生的作品，谢谢。
谢谢刘院士。Okay. So Mr. Liu said we have an entry bar to exhibit here. Okay. Like people artists over 100 years old or like mid-age, 90 years old, like still young. You are a teenager.
Thank you.
So and he loved your works. Okay. 谢谢刘院士。
我有一个英文的这个一个大纲翻译。
对，我们会传给摩根先生看。是的。He has an English translation, so we'll pass it on to you later. Okay.
不是空手道，都是有备而来的啊。
是，好，谢谢刘院士。好，I'll remove the caption. Spotlight. How do I? Gallery. Okay, from here. Okay, let's spotlight. Okay. Next, we have Professor Arthur Kao, Professor Emirati from the San Jose State University, art historian, Professor Gao. 观众说你可以戴上这个讲，现场会听得对清楚一点。我帮你戴，您坐下来，我帮你别在上面就好。你坐。这样扣在这个上面。好。
各位贵宾各位网上的朋友听众，大家好。非常感谢我们的苏馆长能够举办这么多的活动展览。那这一次呢，很特别，是讲英语的Mr. Morgan Stanley 所以这个是一个中西交流非常重要的一种活动那今天呢是苏馆长呢要我来讲几句话关于这个展览跟气的关系那这个气呢maybe I can also speak in English. Yeah. The topic today, according to Mr. Su's suggestion, is talking about the qi. Qi. What is qi? Qi. In English, there's no clear translation. We may say a kind of invisible energy. And this invisible energy staying in many kind of object or space. For example, when we talk about the so-called the invisible energy around our body, we call the 空气. 空气. What's 空气? It's very hard to translate in English. So, and all kind of other qi staying in various kind of object, space. So this is the very broad kind of objects for us to find out, and since it's invisible, so it's a space in many objects. For example, we talk about the animal. A dog have the dog qi. We talk about the elephant. We have the elephant qi. So all kind of, and this the other kind of qi, such as the light, we call the light qi. The dark with the dark qi. The life have the life qi. So what's qi? Qi is invisible energy, invisible life for in everywhere. And this is the broadest kind of subject and the kind of image for the artist. So since the ancient time, the Chinese painter talk about painting. The first thing is qi, and how to express qi. There's no clear kind of direction for us. So Chinese painter said, where could you get the kind of idea of qi? Listen to music. Look at it dancing. So music, dance, yeah, chi, but that's not enough for the modern and especially Western artists, because the Chinese qi, talk about qi, it's kind of a realistic image, kind of movement and interaction, and also the ink, dark and light interaction. That is almost the Chinese painters talk about qi. And this qi has to be very active movement, so-called qi yun sheng dong. Okay. Well, Western, not the same. Western talk about qi, human energy, human interaction or action qi. Okay. What's that else? Father's qi. Okay. What else? Most important, the qi of light. Chinese didn't pay much attention to that. The Chinese talk about light, just leave it open. Okay. So when we talk about light, we have to study the Western painting media, like watercolor, like oil painting. This could create the kind of rhythm of light. Okay, so this is the so-called qi yin， 用在这个光色的表现，这是很重要的尤其是在讲现代化的尤其像 Professor Morgan's painting, we look at it. I think he got the inspiration of Chinese painting, especially the philosophy of qi. But he didn't stay just in Chinese paintings qi. Chinese paintings qi use brush strokes, the line, that's the movement as the interaction qi. But Miss Morgan's painting spent much more kind of effort in the expression, color and light. And because he used very special kind of media, that's not what the Chinese painting use. So his painting has a light shining reflection and give us a very realistic kind of sunlight. But what he used in Chinese, the most important is black ink. So black and white and the light meet each other. That's created his East meet West in his art, his painting. And most attractive is his special kind of media that was, I think he can express what kind of media he used to create this kind of very bright kind of light and color. So the Chinese, when Professor Morgan talked about the modern artists, this kind of adopting the Chinese painting, like Morgan Stanley, there are many of them simply just adopted Chinese calligraphy styles, brush lines, and the kind of rhythm of qi. So this directly get from Chinese kind of qi. So when in the modern time, when you are going to do a painting, you want to develop something your own, what you could do. Depends on your adoption of media and your interest of qi, your concerns about the expression of qi. So the most important is to create, to find out the qi you like. Okay, when you see that qi, light, the qi of light, the qi of color, the qi of brush line, the qi of nothing, the qi of everything together. Wow. So depends on your choice. There are millions of role or path for you. So to be a modern artist, we are very lucky. We can choose the qi we like. But the most important thing is you have to capture the kind of feeling. That's a feeling you have to establish by yourself. Your visible kind of experience is very important. Like Mr. Morgan, he traveled to China and other places and see a lot of painting and have a lot of exploration. So he could capture the one he liked and to express the rhythm of light, the rhythm of color, and the rhythm of composition is very important. So when we look at this painting today here, you see he has the abstract, semi-abstract, and expression something for your imagination. You don't have to capture that, oh, this is a man, oh, this is a kind of what the sun, or this is, you don't have to do that. You can enjoy it just looking at and use your imagination. You go into the deep world of his painting. And so you can look at, stand like I stand in front of his painting. I can, oh, I traveled into the mysterious world. So mysterious is modern art, the kind of rule. Everyone, when you wanted to become a outstanding painter, you have to understand how to create the mysterious qi to attract the visitors, because that if you paint a painting with a very clear kind of a subject, clear composition, you look at, oh, yeah, that's good. I like it. Yeah, very beautiful color. It's a tree, a bird. Very good. Yeah, that is the paintings for the common people to look at. But if you wanted to create a kind of painting with a very deep philosophy to attract the good kind of artist or the art critics, then you have to create something more mysterious for you to imagination. Okay, I think I just okay, this is a short kind of introduction to this qi, because the qi is the Chinese in Chinese history has a long, several thousand years, and we talk about the so-called qi yin sheng dong. It's very important. Okay, thank you.
谢谢高教授。
没什么作用。
Okay, thank you, Professor Cao. Next, we have Professor James Su, who's also an artist, and he also does an abstract painting. Welcome, Professor Su. slide 帮你调出来，对，对，he has a slide， 是 PDF 的，对吧？是这个，我看一下，摩根先生画作是这个哈，这个，是这个哈 ，OK。page down 在这里，这个 down， 我先那个 share 一下，我来 share screen。这个 ，let me share the screen. Okay, now we have this. 我要全屏一下。它这个全屏的不见了。等一下，我把这个 loading。high loading control， 它的全屏在哪里？这个，这样，好 ，up down 是这样，可以，这样，这个别在您这个，比较轻松一点。
这个
对，这个也可以，这个上下就可以。对。
很高兴今天能够对我看到这毛根先生的画很有感触。我觉得毛根先生的画把这个中西文化跟哲理呢结合得非常好，达到了一个非常高的高度。我呢是简单从技术方面来看一看我对他的画的体会。这个我想先讲一讲天人合一这个概念，因为这个是大家都很有兴趣的。看了毛根呢先生的画，我就觉得第一个想法就是天人合一的想法。那个中国这个艺术的概念里面，人都是画的很小的，人是融合在大自然当中，跟这个天是融合在一起的。所以你们看这个画，左边右边的张大千的人都是非常渺小的，因为显示的大自然是很强烈，天意很大，然后人是很渺小的。那么相对来讲，这个就是中国人对这个自然界对这个heaven就是天的看法，同时呢也反映了中国人呢对于这种皇权思想天子之脚下都是比较 obey 的，都是服从的概念，所以说很深的几千年渗透到中国人的心里去了。那这当然张大千也是，你看他是张大千，我看了他的泼墨山水，他是先大规模的泼墨以后下面加几个小人，你看很多他的画都是这样画的，因为如果不加小人呢，没有 focus points， 加了小人就显得这个山非常雄伟，非常高大。那这张画毛根先生也笑，就是 Frederick 的画，
那西方人呢，他就讲个性自由、个性开放，他是依赖群山小，就是看人是要掌控自然的，人是要发挥自己的个性的。所以又看了这张画，一张画呢是另外一张画的是一个女孩看世界，就是这张画呢就是用刚才那个思维，因为现在地球上的人就把世界捣鼓折腾很厉害，所以这是 upside down， 把世界全都倒过来了。那毛根先生的画呢是没有人的，但是呢他把所有的观众跟他自己全都带入到这个境地里面去。就是我看的话，就是一个天人合一的思想，就是马上涌上心头了。那再讲另外一个题目，就是物象和景观。景观呢，就西方的画是讲究景观的，就是第二个景观的，就像一个看到外面的风景，开这个窗。所以西方的话，你看四边都是扩张出去的。就是我看的话，就毛根先生画也是看了以后。他没有边界的，其实你觉得他的画朝左右上下都还是有景的，他是就取了一个窗口去看这个景的。相对来讲，东方的话呢是收进来的、保守的，因为东方人呢讲物象，因为东方人特别是中国人是农耕民族，物质性比较主要，所以他是看事物的。对景观呢相对来讲就是次要了。你看，所以这下面一幅是李可銮的画，你看他是要表达是当中一个小孩跟个牛，所以他整个构图的数字啊什么全都钻过来，把所有的中心呢就把人家叫到里面中心。那右边这个毛根先生也出一幅画也显示，他这个山高寺院啊，他是全都是在里面兜圈的，就是也是收缩的，就相对来讲西方人的话是开放的话。它是收缩的，是以物为主，不是以景观为主。那我们看到这幅画就是一点透视，就是我们一般来讲，现在西方人画画就是西方的油画，它是一个个窗去取景的，所以一个人站在那里的可以看取很多的景，就要开很多的窗。那我们东方人呢，相对来讲，它是以物质为主，以讲故事为主的。这幅《清明上河图》，你们就看到，他这个画家呢，就一幅画里呢画了很多景，这个画家呢就一路等于走过去，看一个一个的商贩啊，这个商家什么小贩人物，他把这个画在一起，所以呢形成一个长幅。那毛根先生的画呢，我觉得他吸收了这个东方的这个长幅画的优点，就是多点透视。那这一幅就是《江山万里图》，也是这样的，就像好像一个人画家在船上，就是全部一路上看过去，这感觉就是非常非常长的一个长幅，就人家看上去很多很多的焦点，很多很多的故事，山景都在里面。那上下也是这样的，像这幅画就显示了这个从上到下都是一个景，就好像画家呢有的翅膀在飞上去，一个个视角呢是看上去的。这就是东西画的区别，就是我们讲多点透视。那我觉得毛根先生的这幅画都吸收了东方这个画家的这种理念概念。所以你看他的话，你看这一幅画，他在当然是转过来了，都可以。那下面一幅画，它是一个一个的就 shape， 就是我们讲气，就一个个套当中的气呢收下来在上面，所以也是一个给人家看的是从左边看到右边，是好像一个一个的看着非常丰富的。另外呢，我在讲毛根先生的话，我就觉得他的画的是宇宙，是一个天体。那旁边左下一个角呢，是一个中国的山水画，就是中国山水画的意境就比不上毛根先生的画。我觉得毛根先生是跨越了这个东方画里面画的山水，而是画到宇宙。我很少看到这个东方画家画宇宙的画，非常少，所以境界就不同。那这一幅画呢，就是右边是毛根先生画，左边呢是一幅画，实际上不是画的，而是这个 Hubble telescope， 就是哈勃望远镜啊，它是拍的天体画。我觉得跟毛根先生的画呢，其实 这种光线光耳的力非常非常像，所以我觉得毛根先生的画是跨越了宇宙，跨越到几千年、几万年以后的情感。那这次展览的就是省级万丈放的很好的题目。那我觉得当中它还有一个 architecture， 那就是显示毛根先生的画是一个构成跟策划的在里面的。所以我下面很简单的就是我刚才跟毛根先生讲，我讲你的画事先都有构思吧，都是，他讲没有的，他是画到哪里是哪里的，就是等于是随时发挥的。那么我觉得他这个构思跟这个技能看法全都在他的心里。那下面你看他如果是表达气的话，他一环扣一环，然后到当中的话就收下来，然后又是两个气，给人家看上去这个气是很丰富的，能量强是很强的能量在里面。那刚才也讲到气啊，我最后的高先生啊，我跟你讲去，我这东方跟西方很大的区别就是东方有个气影，西方有个光影。我觉得毛根先生的画是把东方的气影跟西方的光影结合得非常好。那下面我们看看，下面就是这个东方的气啊，实际上是因为中国画是画在宣纸上面的，所以它这个气就是留白，就不画了，就是气产生了，那很容易造成的气。那个西方画呢，是画在油画布上的，油画布 canvas 呢很难就是直接就造成气，不像宣纸一样的，所以呢它是后面要加白色颜色呢去造成的气，所以这是非常难的。但是毛根先生做的非常好。那你看下面一个是张大千的话，他这个气呢，这个气是中国画气，我仔细研究一下，他这个气有很多，有的气是上升的，有的气是下降的，有的气是吸上来的，有的气是散出去的。那气也分成水气啊、雾气啊，很多。中国讲气有6个气。那然后你看右边那幅画也是张大千，好像张大千画，他这个气呢是从右边过来。你看它的帆船下面都没有一个square 的放，但下面不画的，为什么？他要让气进来，这个帆船就升起来。我就看到很多人画的帆船就是四方形，全都封死的，他这个气就进不进去。所以这个张大千呢，还是对气掌握的很不错。那你看看这西方的画，就是因为他这画的方法就很难画气，所以我就想无气少运。那我们看到毛根先生的话，我就斗胆分享，他对这个气理解很深。你看他的气啊，你看从左边那幅画，它是左边过来气流通，这个是黄颜色的白的气，然后下面蓝颜色也是有气的。那这一幅画呢是更加好了，它这个气是上升的气跟水平的气呢联合在一起。那好，我再讲一个气啊，就是东方画的气啊，我们一般的气，实际上讲的很玄妙的，都是能量在流动的能量。但是中国老百姓呢，对这气的认识是很实际的。这个你看以前的气是三横，甲骨文的气三横，就3朵云在飘，就是叫气。那后来的到春秋以后的气啊，这个字写法当中加了个米，为什么是加个米啊？就是有了水气就可以有米吃，有粮食丰收了就有饭吃了，所以加了个米。所以呢，就是这里面就这个差距了，就是老百姓的看法跟画家的看法不同，所以这个画家把气搞得很玄乎。那我在讲西方，就是我前面讲的，东方的就是常以气，西方常以光影。摩根先生的画呢，就是我觉得是他光用的非常好，像这幅画看上去很令人感动。你这左边的话有一个光团，然后有一点裂缝裂开来啊。那我仔细看了毛根的画，他这个光影用的非常好。这里几幅画都是深的边，都是上下全都深的，然后当中是亮的，所有基本上都是这样。那这样的话，这光影就把当中亮光现出来了。那他的话还有一个空间时间，像时间隧道一样的帮助人家穿过去。那还有阴阳交替，我都不讲了。那个道子呢，就是讲的， 道家思想呢，就是要世界呢就是这样，就是要听其自然，要顺其自然。世界就是道可道，这是道非道，就是世界也不是很有规律的。那我们的世界就是混沌的世界，所以呢，就是这幅画就是感觉就是一个世界是很混沌一片的，还没有开放一样的。然后呢，就是毛根先生画就感觉一个我看的是就感到一个灵魂在升华，就是好像非常 positive 非常好的一个感觉是升华。这是看了毛根先生画的很让人感动的地方。好吧，我的话讲到这里。
张欣，哎，
你把詹姆斯的核心观点来稍微翻译几句吧，几个非常重要的理念，你讲一下。
他又不想从你身上下来。Okay, so Professor Su basically talked about the chi in Professor Morgan's painting, and he points out that there are light and shadow, there are yin and yang, and there is space and time, and also it's like the original world before civilization.
Thank you.
Chaos world.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Professor Su. Next, we have Professor Franklin, and he is on Zoom. I'll let him.
Yes, I need to
Okay.
put in my slides.
Right, I'll make you the co-host so you can share your slides.
Okay, please go ahead.
And I'll ping you for everyone. Okay, now you're the co-host.
Okay, good. Can you see my pictures?
No, we can only see you, but not your slides.
Oh, that's strange. Let me try share the picture again.
Okay, now we can see the
Now you
slides.
can see. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Now here we go.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll just.
Well, my first slide is the cover page. My title for today's discussion is certainly in Chinese, 杰米·摩根抽象艺术西国讨论会. But to pay respect to an English scholar, we need to use English. Even my English is very limited. So the title for the English title is The Magic Touch of Jeremy Morgan's Art, so double M. Well, in the center, the touch, you can see Professor Morgan's touch of his painting with his hand and with the shade. He mentioned that many of the Asian artwork didn't pay attention or use shade, but here you can see his hand and his the shade of his hand, so he covered both. On the left is what Professor Morgan presented to us 2 years ago, but due to technical difficulties, we couldn't see on the Zoom clearly, but fortunately, there's a small picture like we can see that Professor Morgan is using his hands like a musical conductor to conduct his symphony to the audience. So he's not a new old friend in a way. So on the bottom left of the lead, that's today's exhibition. Just one small piece of his painting, but that's already enough as a big one, as the other artists' work paint very large, but very little to show. But in Professor Morgan's artwork, just cut a small piece, which is already a grand piece. So I put it there to make a contrast to 2 years ago, what he was conducting the symphony to the audience. On the right, bottom right, I'm using a famous artist, Qi Baishi, carving of stone, which says, 悠悠梅花是故人. Well, we know that at this season is the time for the Chinese Mayflower to bloom. And in his cutting says, to see the Mayflower as the old friend coming back again as every season. For Professor Morgan, he is an old friend to us now since 2 years ago. On the upper right in the middle, I'm using a famous scholar and also calligrapher, but also a painter, 台静龙先生的梅花 is very special. He gave this piece to his student, Professor Huang Qifang. So I'm using this to welcome Professor Morgan as an old friend coming back, using Qi Baishi's carving and also Tai Jinlong's painting to welcome Professor Morgan. Well, talking about 2 years ago, this was what happened right here 2 years ago. You can see Director Su Jianhua on the left, and on the lower left, there's a group picture of the opening speech speakers. Well, for this exhibition, for those who, like myself, coming to this exhibition, it's like get into a large garden. But more, better to speak is like Alice in Wonderland, to see so many great pictures, colorful light, and all kinds of great pieces. So here is a picture of another artist, Grace Huang. She is in the audience right now. And I took a picture at her liberty that she was looking at one of Professor Morgan's painting, and in deep thinking, standing there almost for a minute, still thinking about what's going on. So I took the liberty to take this picture to show how impressive Professor Morgan's painting can take the eyeballs of a very good artist for more than 1 minute standing there. So I changed Alice in Wonderland to Grace in Wonderland to honor my boss, Grace Huang. On the upper right, you see a rabbit. That means time is very special, very limited. So everything is time limited. And to make this exhibition, I put 2 couplets to say what's going on. First in Chinese, 布展还总要高手. To make the exhibition, you need a good hand, a special high-class, high-taste hand to put those paintings in the right place, in the right combination. So it's not a normal way, just put one by one, and as a troop of army standing there. It's not. The exhibition, how to arrange these artworks require good taste. And in the Chinese word means a high hand. High hand means top talent. The next one of the couplet is 观意得先去就匡. This one means to look at the painting, the modern painting especially. The viewer, the audience should take away the old frames from the previous education or experience without framing, and just open your mind. As Professor James Su said, Professor Morgan's painting, there's no boundary, it's all open, expanding to the universe. So you notice that none of the Professor Morgan's painting has a wooden frame as the normal oil painting, because it's not limited. His painting cannot be limited, and it's better not to have the regular frame to frame his artwork in. So I'm taking this picture to start the talk. Well, the next one is back to the touch, the magic touch of Professor Morgan. Here he is explaining to us that how he did this painting and how many layers of colors to do this one in the taste of the Chinese painting landscape taste. He did very well. But there's one thing he mentioned, he would be like to have something on his painting, but his background is not allow him to do that easily. So I take the liberty to putting a line of a famous Chinese poetry line, is 山在虚无缥缈间, as a title for this painting. Well, talking about the qi, everyone talked about qi for quite a while, and the way I look at the qi of Professor Morgan is the qi of ABC. What I mean? A stands for American, where he is now. But also, I saw his lecture a moment ago. His experience, observation, study, and review covers many of the Asian artworks. So the first A stands for American, also stands for Asian artworks. Second one's B, that's his hometown, the British landscape. He mentioned and showed the beautiful landscape of the British. Then C, certainly, with the color of red, we know that means Chinese. So put together, A plus B plus C, that's Morgan's Art Qi suppliers.
Is supply.
Well, this slide I just put in 10 minutes ago when I heard Professor James Su talking about the qi and energy again, and also the light and so and so. So as well, it's better to put in Einstein's famous formula, E equals to M times C and times C again. That means C squared. But 10 minutes ago, I got an idea from Professor James. Well, I think it's better to explain in a very simple scientific equation that everyone can understand what qi is talking about. Energy in the quantum mechanics really means the particle and the wave. So here I'd like to say the qi, Professor Morgan and also Director Su Jianhua means it's really not just energy, but the wave form in energy is the proper one. Then qi, we Chinese use. The Westerners, they don't know what we talk about qi. But if you say the wave, energy of wave, then they all understand because energy has the two forms, particle and wave. So qi is a wave in the Western physics. So E equals M times C1 and C2 because the C squared, in my view, they have two different C. So let's say the C1 is color, which Professor Morgan is really great at. The C2 is energy in the speed of light. So that's what Professor Su said. Professor Morgan treat the light is much better than most of the abstract artists. The light control is one of his talent. So certainly the M, which means M stands for Morgan's Qi. So that's what I got 10 minutes ago and presented here to get you a laugh. Well, I'm not an artist. I'm neither a critique of art nor a art history scholar, but I do know a little bit about the literature and other things in that sense. It is right here in this gallery. You can see there was 12 years ago, 2012, when the Chinese Mo Yan won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And director Su Jianhua ordered me. He said, "Frank, you are the chairperson of the North California Chinese Writers Association. You should give us a talk tomorrow after the announcement of the Nobel Prize winning of Mo Yan by Chinese." I said, "Tomorrow?" He said, "Yeah, we need to present right away." I said, "Well, how about one more day?" He said, "Okay, one more day." So in one more days, 24 hours, I went through 13 books of Mo Yan and came out with my presentation to talk about what a good literature work is, because I don't know art and I'm not an art critic nor a historian, but I do know I can use literature to reflect what's going on for great artwork. Maybe they can be used again. So this is what I wrote 12 years ago, how to appreciate and to measure a good novel or literature. There are 6 ways to measure them. The first one is, as Professor James Su just mentioned, when he looked at Professor Morgan's paintings in this gallery, he was touched without any regular way to describe. So the first one is a great literature work or a art painting, whatever form that is, especially painting, is look at it, the viewers are touched, but has no proper ways to express that feeling, because a great painting is so fresh, so there's no way it can use the previous words to describe your feeling. That's what Professor Su just mentioned, and that's what I used 12 years ago as the first requirement to measure a good piece of literature work, but here for the painting as well. That's the first one. Second one, you can put it down. That's the first photo I took at the liberty of Grace Huang. She was looking at the painting of Professor Morgan for 1 minute, just frozen there. So she couldn't move her eyes away. So again, I can see my second measurement is true, it's valid. You cannot move your eyes away from a great painting like Professor Morgan's artwork. Third one, it should broaden your view. Well, we do see Professor Morgan went to the top of a Himalaya mountain. He jumped from the airplane. He traveled all over the world. So by looking at his, even you call it abstract art, we already widen our understanding of the world, of the universe also as well, and different cultures. That's the third one, to measure a great artwork. The fourth one is to inspire you with infinite imagination, which we all know Professor Morgan did it. The number 5 is important. Other than being stimulated, but once you leave the gallery, you leave the museum, most of us will forget what you see in a month, if not in 3 days. But Professor Morgan's painting gave me a long memory for two years. I couldn't forget his artwork. So the number 5 of measurement is also valid and proven by this moment to look at Professor Morgan's the painting. It's hard to forget, although we all forget the details, but the impression, the feeling will stay with us for 2 years, at least for me. But the last one is the most important, is whenever read that great novel again, it looked like a new one. Whenever read Lao Tzu, Dao De Jing, the second time, the third time, the 100th time, the 300 times, I have read Dao De Jing for more than 1,000 times. But every time I look at it, any sentence is new to me. So the same thing is true for a great novel and also valid for Professor Morgan's artwork. 2 years ago, I saw his painting and I remembered my feeling. But this time I look at it again. There's some of the artwork coming back again. But to me, they are all fresh. As Professor Su said, it's fresh feeling again. So by using the measurement on great novel, I applied them to Professor Morgan's artwork, and they all valid. I'm very pleased because I was wondering, these 6 ways of measure of a good novel, can that apply to other artwork? By now, I'm pleased that really valid. I can apply the same measurement to painting as well. Well, talking about the learning art, last time, 2 years ago, I gave a talk at the opening ceremony, and I commented that there's imbalance of art trade because our good, best artists went to the West, but they don't come back, and they went to from East to the West and stay there. But there has been none, in my opinion, with the power of the weight of Zhao Weiji from the West coming to the East. So talking about business in trade balance, it has been unbalanced for almost 100 years since Zhao Weiji went to France. But it seems to me there has been none of the same caliber artists from the West come to the East to make the balance of the business of art in trade. And 2 years ago, I had a feeling, well, by now, there's one artist from the West coming to the East to make the balance. And I noticed Zhao Weiji had 3 pieces of painting since 1987. And I also noticed that the influence is obvious on Professor Morgan. He has quite a group of paintings in the form of 3. Probably that has a connection or influence from Zhao Weiji. That's my comment. And also Zhao Weiji, as an abstract artist, many people thought for abstract art, you don't need to give any title because it's abstract. That's because many people misunderstood. Art is one capability. Literature, poetry is another dimension. They don't mix. The great ones, the lucky ones, might have both, including calligraphy, including putting seals. But very few can manage any one of them in the highest achievement. So Zhao Weiji himself, after went to France, many of his abstract painting, he didn't give title, using just a name, the year, the number instead of a title. So which led to many of the Chinese artists to claim that abstract artwork doesn't need a title. Well, I say, sorry, you just mix up the 2 talents. Artists can be great on color, but may not be good on poetry title. But here I noticed 2 years ago, Professor Morgan was good on painting, but I thought he was a poet, and it turned out to be he was really a poet. So he's good at both painting and poetry and poem, and also as a great poet. So that's going in and coming out. So a great artist needs to go into the past to get the nutrition and coming out again. To get in is to do the good is hard, but coming out is even harder. We noticed a month ago, the artist Liu he went back, spent 3 years to make imitation of the ancient Song and Tangdanese painting. That's in. On the right, there's a book by a professor, Gao Mushen. He went in, covered many of the important stages of Chinese artwork. I read most of them so far, except the latest one. So Professor Gao went in and also come up with many new work. So Professor Gao Mushen, he went in and out successfully. On the lower left corner, there's a green swan by fellow Liu. He is in and out easily and sometimes in between, especially at a year of turbulence. And many people are worried about the black swan is flying over us again in 2024. So we are very pleased to see that fellow Liu went in and out and also stayed in between to present a green swan to us, which is environmentally fit, but also with a positive energy against the black swan over our head. On the far right corner, that's Professor James Hsu's latest painting. He's the one, never repeat. So I'll let him to talk about his painting, but just I want to show one of his recent work. He coming into the history and coming out with a new painting again. But most important, we are lucky to have the free lunch that James Hsu said there's no free lunch, but really we do, because Director Hsu gave us the free lunch every month, twice a month sometimes. And it's great to see the artist in and out. That's the famous fast food called In and Out. So join our team, get in and out. Well, talking about no title for the abstract art, I want to give another example to correct the many artists' claim. There's no title needed. Well, all depends. Even Zhao Wuji, he sold a highest price of his painting is a homage to Fu, pay respect to Du Fu. So he had title, 1958, I believe. And look at the Professor Morgan's painting on the right. Well, there's the montage in it, which Professor Morgan didn't mention it today, to my surprise. Because in many of Professor Morgan's artwork, he has used montage in his paintings. So a different time, place, and scenes, actions all moved in his freedom. So he has successfully used the montage from the movie into his painting. And that's the reason that nothing repeating, because it's flowing with his mind and flowing with time, and also the time can be changed. The place can be changed in any way he likes with the freedom, and the action as well changed. So that's the montage he used successfully in his painting. But talking about the montage, I have to say, when we're talking about Du Fu, we need to know that the montage really come from Du Fu, in case you didn't know, because very few people know. Well, talking about montage, which Professor Morgan used it successfully, it's really need to go back almost 100 years, 80 years to Sergei Eisenstein of Russian. And Eisenstein's montage come from, inspired, in case you didn't know, from Chinese characters when he was spending his time in the Far East to serve in the army. And he was influenced, inspired by Du Fu's poem. The reason I quote the line is not just my idea without any evidence or study. It's really from a German female scholar, Monika Monsach. She wrote her paper in 1994 and in a book form in Germany to begin with, then later on translated by MIT to English. So talking about montage, again, Du Fu is coming out and Chinese character also coming out. The reason I can comment on this subject, which is very deep, is that I wrote 2 papers on montage and also several papers on Du Fu. So my comment, even on 1 page, but there's several papers behind them. Well, the last one is about Professor Morgan again. He gave a talk 3 weeks ago when I was at the opening ceremony. And I like to put in, because Professor Morgan, to start his speech, he used a quote. Here I like to use a quote from Nietzsche at the time of the very turbulent age, and with the many black swans flying over our head. This is what Nietzsche said: "We have art in order that we may not perish from truth," which I think is very true. And with the positive energy from Professor Morgan's artwork, he is qualified to have this line from the famous philosopher Nietzsche. The last one, now is my turn to pay respect to Professor Morgan, as Zhao Wuji paid respect to Du Fu, Monet, and Matisse with the title, not the numbers or years. As I mentioned 3 weeks ago at the Professor Morgan's exhibition this time, that he's a man of 3 Ps. He is a painter, a poet, and a philosopher, which he showed evidence in his speech with deep details. So that's a man of 3 Ps. But I also noticed there's something we need to pay respect other than the 3 Ps. He is also a great teacher, as Confucius. Depending upon your background, talents, understanding, he will teach you tirelessly, even during the COVID-19's highest time, that was 2 years ago. You'll notice the picture I took. He was explaining to a young lady, probably a junior one in the understanding of her question. But Professor Morgan, you notice he's not young. Certainly he's much younger than me. But at the height of COVID-19, one should, at his age, should put on a mask for his own protection, but he didn't. He kindly, I noticed, I was standing by the side, by the way. He explained to this young lady proper entry-level appreciation of art, about his artwork, and replied more than for a senior artist need to know tirelessly and take a high risk of his own health. So that's a great teacher. And a good teacher should teach people how to catch fish, not to give fish, or to just to present the fish they caught, but you cannot eat. In that sense, Professor Morgan is a great teacher. He showed us all the large, small, colorful, twisted, shining fishes to us, but he also kindly, open-minded, without reservation of his skills. He teaches us how to catch fish, the big fish, the beautiful fish in the artwork. At the bottom is my piece. There's a time of a year end, the year of dragons coming. We Chinese usually say, 年年有余 every year has extra left. So we're putting fish there to welcome the new year. So to close my talk, I put in my sketch on the wasted canvas. Just a few strokes here and there with the fish and the sun, whatever you like, as a greeting to the year of dragon. Wish everyone 有余 extra fish in your hand, and also learned from Professor Morgan and how to catch fish. So here I stop and hope that you didn't want to sleep for 10 minutes. So thank you very much for inviting me to this great occasion to share my shallow, limited understanding of art. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lin and Professor Lin. Yes, a famous manufacturer, a semiconductor veteran, and inventors and classical scholars. Okay, our next speaker is online is Peter Liu, 刘君平博士。刘博士，你看看，哈瑞尔，那个把那个文件怎么放上？
主管班长，我这直接我直接共享就行了。你容许我就行了，容许我直接共享。海瑞，我直接共享就行了。
稍等。
你容许我共享，你让我共享的权利我就可以了。主持人不允许我共享屏幕。
稍等。
你让我共享就可以。
OK， 你试一下。
好，我试一下。可以了。可以了，你们能看到吗？
看不到。
正在
能看到吗
？OK， 好 ，Congratulations。Dynamic Fatality。好，开始吧。
各位能看到吗？现在各位能看到行。各位老师，我今天做一个简短的学习和发言。我对摩根教授的艺术创作我还是比较深入了解，也去过他的工作室，尤其对他在东方交流的一段历程，我也是有所了解。针对这样，我有一些我的感想，做一个讨教。我今天这个发言的题目，我主标题有2个，第一个就是我用一个 dynamic vitality， 我这样的一个词，我概括它的这个，还有一个是更为西方的一个词能介入一个就是叫 abstraction of 气，就是气的抽象。前面我用中文翻译，更能贴合气韵生动这样一个词。这2个都是概括我今天主题的一个主旨。但是我这几年一直也在研究一个理论现象，就是针对中西交融的这样一个理论现象。既不是西方的抽象具象，也不是中国传统的意象，这样产生的一种特殊的图像，我称为第3项。所以我用第3项的一个理论来阐述阐释摩根教授的艺术。我做了一个整个的一个调研。艺术史上来看，艺术史在18世纪到19世纪这个转型的这个时期，有一个重要的人叫托拉，这个人在艺术史上也是非常重要的。这个人也深深的影响到默克教授的艺术创作，而且我对托拉的前中后的作品，我进行了也是一个仔细调研。我发现托拉的作品这时候也是将 西方长期以来的具象艺术向这样一个现代性非常重要的一个转型人物。我们从这4幅作品，就能看到，这4幅作品，我们逐渐就能看到，尤其放小的时候，我们能看到它的，画面的一种构成感，尤其和这个之后，到18世纪还有一个非常重要的人，就是叫莫兰迪，这个人和刚才我说的这个托拉，这2个人他共同推进了写实艺术向抽象艺术迈进的一个先驱人物。我们从莫兰迪的这些画的这些瓶子，这些东西，我们就能看到，其实这些他画的不是瓶子，画的是画面的这种从具象往抽象过渡的这种构成感，这种我把它作为形的抽象的第一个阶段。但是这个阶段迈入以后，有一个非常重要的人，就是塞尚。这个人他将成为现代艺术之父，将形推向了往抽象迈进的一个里程碑式的人物。我们从他早期、中期、晚期的作品，我们就看他画的圣维克特山的这些，他正如他自己的理论认为说，如果水果你画的让人看到想吃的话，这是你绘画的最大失败。这已经构成了他这种转型的一种强烈的艺术理念。在这时候，也有一个重要的派别，20世纪初非常重要的派别就是立体派。立体派，当然我们大家都知道的是毕加索，这是他的领军人物。但是我们别忘了，立体派有一个非常重要的人，这个人其实这个人可以说是当时和毕加索，我们有些史料上看到共用一个画室。他探索立体主义的可以说是最原发的一些东西。有一些文献我们也看到，说是毕加索后面盗用了他的有一些东西，在他的启发下，整个把立体派推向了一个20世纪向抽象主义转型的一个非常重要的一个时刻。我们从这前面的这是布洛克的作品，后面是毕加索的作品。我们能看到他把这个世界打碎，重新来组合，重新形成一个立体主义。当时的新闻记者认为，他也是有一些其他派别认为他是讽刺性的时候，他就画的一些小方格嘛，立体的这，所以他就成为一个立体。我们再往下来看，有2个非常重要的人，这2个人我们看到，一个叫康定斯基。康定斯基这是早期的、中期的、晚期的作品。我用一句话来概括，他把点的抽象让他推到了极致。当然，有些教科书上写的他是热抽象，这些我都不认同。下面他有一个人叫蒙德里安，这是他的早期通过树这样一个转型的过程中，最后形成了他的一种艺术史上他有一些人称为能抽象。我认为它是线的抽象，前面和刚才托拉他们是形的抽象，这样成为从形到点到线，再到下面有2个重要的人，一个人叫马列维奇，这个人他就是把面的抽象推到极致，最后在非常郁闷和一个人，这就是抽象主义进入美国本土化的一个非常重要的人，叫贾德，从面推向了体。贾德这是贾德的作品，在这艺术上是毋庸置疑的。我们从形到点可以说是已经完成了他的整个的高楼大厦。我们今天，我们在这样一个语境下讨论这个问题，我们也不能忘到东方。东方的这个头像理念，它一直是很漫长的，它也是超稳定的结构。我们从甲骨文到岩画，到 马家窑彩陶，再到这是一些木石壁画早期的一些把它称为气的这个抽象的第一阶段。这一个阶段它属于一个门洞的，有些人认为说马家窑彩陶它的这些图案是抽象，我不认为它是抽象。这从这个黄公望的这从八大的这从石涛的这从木犀的这一个理念，从东方的视角又看现代性，又看西方。当时当然是封闭的状态，但是他的作品已经呈现了这种理念。我们再看这种第三个阶段，就是我们今天探讨的，就是关于摩根教授的。摩根教授，他是从西方的眼光当然这个图像系统，刚才摩根教授和各位老师的发言，我上都提到这个问题。我们能看到他透纳对他的直接影响。这前面是透纳的作品，后面是摩根教授的作品，这也是透纳的作品，摩根教授的作品。他们这样差了多少年，这些视觉图像形成了支撑的这个图像的往前推进。这个前面也是这也是透纳的作品，后面是摩根教授的作品。我们能看到，摩根教授在继承这首经典中，他如何形成他的图像系统。我们再把视角回到东方，就是摩根教授和东方的作品进行一个比较。我们当然这些比较不一定准确，我从中间大的构图和图像系统上，我们能发现一些蛛丝马迹。左面是黄公望的，这是他中国山水画典型的两山加一水的构图。这种构图我们在摩根教授的作品中，我也能发现这种，当然里面的东西不一定一模一样，但是这个大的构图，它有异曲同工之妙。我们也在看这个长卷，这是王希孟的《千里江山图》下面的，上面的是摩根教授的作品。这些大的构图关系和器用的一些开合关系，它形成了非常高度的一致。这个左面，摩根教授也提到范观的这个《西山行旅图》，我从他的作品上，我也发现了这种图像的之间的有一些关系。我们再看，这是唐英的作品，我们也从摩根教授的图像上也发现了这一些。这也是宋画，我们在摩根教授进行比较，他这个气息的流动和山川和宇宙的一些关系，在他这个现代性的绘画中如何再现这些，形成了一些高度的相似性。这是中国80年代的一件作品，他的作者叫任简他的画家也是非常重要的一个实力派的艺术家。他当时10米长的一个长卷，这个也是用现代西方的方式来阐释中国东方气的一个。他的这个作品名字叫元画，元是元代的元，画是化学的化，他的这些作品当时影响也比较大。当然我从这个作品这个图像的它的关系上，我觉得他们还是有一致的这个创新性和探索性。我们再把这个系统我们真正回到东方的理论，空而易起，言真实而难巧。中人的诗品中也提到了文以静而意有余，而这些我们从中国的气用的一些理论中，我们大量能找到关于这个理论的一些东西。这个是那个霍去病的这个马唐飞燕的那件作品，他的这个雕塑，他就是在石头上稍微雕一点东西，既像石头，又像一个虎，处于一个这样一个是和不是之间的这种要的，也非常有特色。随着这个时代的变迁，现代性的这个概念具有不同的含义。17、18世纪，它意味着以数学 统一统摄人类生活精神方面的方方面面，而多元化和一致性。这样来看，消除边界，面向多元的后现代，不仅是现代性的程序，而且是现代性的一种特殊的表现。在威尔士的公共美学中，强烈提出了这种理论观点。我们再看这左边的，这是摩根教授的作品，这是小普切夫的这个作品，他们之间我们看他们在精神的内核上还是有高度的一致的东西。当然，我们看我今天我提出这种理论，我是图像的这种交融中，这是我这将近10年一直思考的一个问题。许多人认为说这种会回到复古，其实这个最担心的是复古。我们用一个当代非常重要的哲学家的观点，他认为说不要一味的发扬本国文化，本国文化的发扬还得要靠重新创造。齐泽克的观点是，传统文化只有在每个时代重新打量、重新创造的前提下，才能有真正的存活下去的可能性。我们看待摩根教授的作品，也是把这种传统的东西让它重新创造所以他把全球化和在地性的东西，他处理的非常和谐，高度的一致。右面这是张大千的作品，在这时候已经他意识到已经用这种第三种图像的这种道路方式给我们做了一个很好的榜样。我们看这个，其实第三项我提出这个我对它的界定，第一，它是非写实也非抽象；第二，特点它是来自主体的意念，强调主体性和生命性；第三，在中国气用和意境的理论下，展开当代的生成；第四，它就是气的艺术。我看舒馆长也在朋友圈提出说，气象艺术。其实这个我也想到这个词，我也想到这个词。这个气象艺术，突然就感觉有个气象学或者这样容易滑向这一个，但是我觉得这个界定是非常有意思的，从点到线到面再到体，最后到气。但是我们这个气，我们在当代和现代性的观念下来认识这个气，这个就是有它的一种创新性。我在这个上面主要提出艺术的有独特的这个神采风度。当然这是右面是我的作品，我也在探索这种图像的这种中西结合形成下的这种第三种路径。我们看这个第三项，我把它这个我气的统一下形成的这个统摄下形成的第三种可能性，这可以说是通过艺术创造一个全新的生态文化艺术。它主要是用东西图像方式用这个西方如弗洛伊德、荣格的潜意识理论，这第三项美学理论产生于后现代文化背景下，既有海德海、杜威、奎因的等思想的路线也有存在主义哲学家的思想轨迹。我们必须要有效的继承和学习西方关于图像理论，尤其在抽象艺术的这个研究的这样一个可以说是成果之上，我们在研究这些东西，我们不能直接回到中国传统的这种关于相关的理论，直接用它的理论解释现在的问题，如会产生这个雾里看花的一些，或者是这个其他的一些错觉的效果。这个上面的这个作品，最近在上海的一件展的作品，这个艺术家也是比较特殊，他将用了几十年的一个菜板子，这个菜板子放到一个角落已经发霉了，他把这个菜板子拿过来以后，适当的里面画了画，装了一个非常高级的框，在上海的这个现场展览，我看到非常有意思的这件作品，我觉得和我研究的这种理念是高度一致，而且和摩根教授的作品，我觉得他有很多异曲同工的这个妙处。所以我们看这个第三项这个理论理念，针对当前 东西方文化的问题出发，它的模式重要的是解决当前艺术的一个核心的2个方面问题，一个是当前艺术的一个在地性问题，第二个是当前艺术的一个现代性问题。这2者最重要落实到图像的第3种这个途径的可能性的这个再过多少年？再过100年、200年，我们看到这个，就好像我们在看待抽象艺术或者具象艺术，这个是否能形成当代一个新的图像系统？这还有需要更多学者来探讨。我作为一个小结，我把具象艺术称为是看山是山的阶段，我把抽象艺术看成是看山不是山的阶段，我把传统的这个意象艺术 image 我们界定到这是东方的一种非常超稳定的一个结构。我们这2个相加，也形成了我们当代许多艺术的现状，也是摩根教授艺术图像的一种系统，它就形成了一种第3种图像系统，就形成了看山又是山的阶段。这种阶段，也就是East West，我们现在看到了摩根教授的这种第3种艺术的一种精神世界，批评指正。
好，谢谢 Peter， 谢谢 ，Thank you Peter， 谢谢。那个下面我们最后一位那个讲稿是庞辉，你有文档吗？好。
好的，这个刚才我最后一个，我时间不早了，10分钟，我把这个讲完。我到这里来听了摩根这个教授1个小时的讲解。如果说这个对摩根教授没有看他本人，那么听他的讲课和他的这个这个视频的话，那摩根教授就是一个中国人啊。摩根也是 from China， 摩根也是 Chinese， 摩根也是 Chinese Peter。但是呢，这个我从今天来了就看到了，就是摩根对中国画的研究，好像这个我就感到就是我们倒有一种感觉到就是西方走向东方的味道，所以我就长话短说，我先把这个引入导语，就是有2个，一个刚才看了一下，这个是造物节的作品啊，造物节作品可以看到我们东方人他是走向西方，这个是East go to West。那么这个他这个一看，这是中国画的这3张画，都是由甲骨文字印刷而来，有甲骨文字印刷而来，所以看到他从中国画文字化到下面一步，这就是西方走向西方，这就是造物节。我们前2天我在前段时间我曾经讲过威洛堂，也在这里发过言，关于威洛堂的问题。威洛堂是一个曾经他把甲骨文 搞了一个字帖，到了美国发表。他也长期他是一个非常好的一个书法家，而且他的甲骨文和金文都写得非常好。但是他把甲骨文引入了中国化，那么这个是走向西方的一个初创。最后你看这两个，这两张画也表达一种，他就把中国化到西方形成了最后的结局，就这样一个构成。所以赵无极和韦禄堂他们都是用西方现代绘画形式和油画的色彩技巧表达中国传统文化艺术的意境，作品渗透着中国化的元素，创造了色彩变幻、笔触有力、富有韵律感的绘画空间。他们都是西方现代叙情抽象法的一个代表。所以呢，我跟他们讲了一下，我说他们是东方人，是中国人，洋藏穿在身，心是中国心。他们来自于东方，来自于西方，但是呢，又归回到了东方。只是这个摩根是一个地地道道的西方人啊，西方人画油画就相当于中国人画国画。这个我们从他的作品，从所有的作品当中可以看到一个什么意思呢？他使用西方的颜料画布，用色彩来表达东方的题材，用这个西方的技法来表达东方的意境。特别是在大家都讲了一个光色，刚才好多教授和专家都讲了关于气的问题，那就是用光气色表达大自然的美。大家都知道光有7种颜色，就是红、橙、黄、绿、青、蓝、紫。按照这个油画家何宁曾经给我讲过，他说一种光可以对应折射出7种颜色。如果这样的话，这个光能够折射出19种颜色，将给画家带来取之不尽、用之不竭的资源。而摩根教授就是正是利用这个取之不尽的资源来表达自然世界。所以我跟你讲，我就刚才大家都讲了那么多，我就不想展开。但是呢，我就讲摩根教授的话呢，是深厚凝重、浪漫奔放、瞬息万变、变化无情，将光和色如疾风暴雨、疾风骤雨般的飞临在上面，两者交相辉映、渲染、重叠、拍刷、沉淀、流通这个营造出一种千姿百态的光和影等自然景观。这如真似幻，创造出与大自然的具体形象有机的完美的结合在一起，灵动新颖。这个因为摩根教授在现场，我把英文大概是这个意思表达出来这个表达出来呢，就是说我们从摩根教授的作品来看，从那2幅看，特别是高教授这边这一幅是抽象的，但是展现在大家面前的这幅，如果说我们没有看，是摩根教授的西方人，这幅画就是中国画这幅画就是写实画。这幅画从各种不同的处境、景点去看，它都能够看到，让你每一个角度都是一个非常丰富和深远的意境。所以这个因为时间关系，我就不都展开。你比如像这一幅画，刚才刘教授也讲了， 刘金教授，刘博士也讲了这一幅攀登，我的感觉，刚才他把一幅中国画放在旁边，我说这幅画，他就用光的原理啊，用色彩，用光色彩的原理，把这幅画，把这个大地一分为二啊，把大地的远景摆上，把大地的近景放在底下，然后这里面瀑布啊，整个这样一个世界，把光的折射，把光的折射的所有的点，把那个光的折射的所有点在这里表达出来，瀑布、山泉水、远山，让你感觉到一个大千世界啊，这是一种立体的一种大千世界。那么这种画，画的是非常有气魄啊，画的非常有气魄，很动，云在动，光在动，水在动，世界的一切都在动，这就是给你感到一个动感。所以我就因为时间关系，就是我就不能再展开讲。这画，每一幅画是一个美丽的世界啊，每一幅画都是抽象性的中国山水画啊，抽象性的中国山水画啊，能够表达的淋漓之境啊，表达的淋漓之境。时间关系不能展开，因为不早了。我只能跟最后来把它稍微总结下子。我说他的创作并不局限于传统绘画，而是追求通过色彩、线条、横线的这个变化，来与大地和天空的自然美来把它描绘出来。它材料用的是丙烯材料，大家都知道丙烯后油画。当然，我们这里讲的丙烯材料，刚才我听了他的发言，听他给大家介绍，刚才看了他作品的这个和他以前曾经画过的所有作品来表达，他的作品并不一定都是丙烯材料，它有油画、欧伊尔的，有油画、欧伊尔的，还有带有中国的。一上来，他有一幅画，一个表达的那一幅是中国的水墨，还有水墨在里面等等。所以呢，但是呢，有一条，我感觉到就是说呢，丙烯这个材料画画是比较难画的。为什么这样呢？要动作快，身体要好，动作要敏捷。这个摩根教授这个身体是非常健壮，动作来得快，是吧？所以呢，这个材料画的就比较，所以这个就是这个材料，丙烯这个材料要求同我们的欧亚和的油画的油画的材料是不一样的，油画的材料不一样的，因为它的短，有的时候它的颜色要淡颜色的话，这张画画的淡颜色的话，那个东西是非常强，瞬间就要变化，所以这个要求速度快，所以呢，这个要求画家呢要求具备身体健壮，眼疾手快，非常灵敏，还有一个呢要稳准损快，这样具备这样的基本功。所以他在创作当中呢，聚焦了与大地空间的瞬现，一刹那的表现，这是他的特点。这个摩根教授的一个最大的一个特点，他的画自然界有可能，这些所有的画有可能这个画你找不到，你在自然界永远找不到这种，这是什么办？它是一种梦幻、梦游，一种想象，一种一刹那，一种灵感迸发而出来的。所以呢，它有这么样一个特点，所以我就感觉到呢，这个它是来自于它的瞬间瞬现，一刹那，来自于梦境梦游，让作者呢感受大自然的独立存在，让作者呢感受大自然独立存在，强调了对自然之美的敬畏和感知，呈现出一种 与自然共融的感觉，让我们大家呢在作品上感受到呢自然之美的独特理解和表达。这个它的创作的核心呢，就是对大地和天空之美的感知和理解，着重呈现自然景观，通过色彩、线条、形式的处理，将大洲天空的表现丰富多彩、充满这种梦幻和动感啊。这个总之呢，我看了一下子这个摩根教授的作品，体现了画家的这种激情迸发，心灵与大自然的撞击啊，心灵动脑筋在心灵中大自然这种撞击，在撞击当中演化，在中间如何来折叠拼盘打，然后再去考虑那种撞击，在撞击当中演化，在演化当中升华，仿佛呢进入一个真空状态，全身性运动，豪情壮志，收尽起伏，水纵横放开，一气呵成，展现出人们在人们面前是一幅独特而又激情澎湃的画面，聚焦展现出自然之美的一种独特视角。这种独特视角让我们所有这个地方的作品都能感觉到了。这个是一个英文翻译，这个我把这个表达出来，谢谢大家，就这样。
Okay, thank you. Thank you everybody join us today. 还有什么问题吗？ Do you have any question?
No, we're fine.
No. Okay. Okay. So we end the talk. Thank you.
Thank you. No, please.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your speech. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
放松了就好讲了。